this is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Care Notes with Doug Wilbur. And Doug, we seem to talk about numerous subjects on this program. And I do have to let you know that after our show last week, one of my actual coaching clients was asking a lot of questions about, should I be considering home care in the future? What should I be doing? And I said, well, you should be looking at all of it and see what fits for you and what your needs are. And she's very vibrant. She's doing things very much on her own. She's still driving at the age of 85. And she took one of the new senior road license tests that I guess you can take. I didn't know anything about it. There's a test that you can take, and she passed with flying colors. So I'm going to look into it because I want to make sure that my driving skills are still good. So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, I had the experience and the privilege of being able to go to the Global Leadership Summit that is held annually in Chicago. And it's a phenomenal experience. They have, incredible speakers there. And it gave me an opportunity to take time to work on the business versus in the business. And that's really important for a CEO to be able to do it, or anyone in leadership to be able to do it, because leadership is definitely a privilege. And as a company that is trying to be at the cutting edge of what's going on, it's important to reflect and to think and to have time to say, how do I lead us as a company to do the things that we are wanting to do?
Sure.
And to have, big goals and to lead people to be able to do that so that we carry out the mission that we have as a company. And so over a 2-day period, I was able to hear, some of the great thought leaders of in our nation, to be able to kind of, learn and glean and understand. So there was a whole host of speakers that I was able to see and experience, their ideas and their thoughts, and then just kind of take that information away. But I guess one of the things that I want to talk about is not just about that experience, but also on the idea that, we grow and we learn and we develop, and it's important to do that. I guess, part of it is, one of the things that I've noticed with people who are aging, there are some secrets. And one of the things that I've seen that has been a secret to someone to be successful in aging is whether they keep themselves engaged and youthful in what they do. I don't know. You're at the age, I'm sure, where you're starting to see some of your friends or people that you've known over the years pass away.
Right.
And oftentimes it's friends, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's others, but you're kind of seeing and there's a passing that happens generationally, where your parents pass away and now you're
Right.
you're sort of in their spot, at some point in time, and so the torch has been passed, as far as the who's the oldest generation.
Right.
And um, most of the people we care for, are in that position. Um, and when what I see though is, um, what happens with individuals is their world tends to shrink. It tends to become smaller and smaller because the friends around them, the other family members, tend to not be there anymore.
Right.
Um, and one of the things that has happened, or one of the things that I see that happens with people who are able to live and thrive as they get older, is I've noticed that they tend to have friends that are younger than them. They have their friends that are older, but they cross
Right.
generations, and they also have younger friends. The ones that tend to struggle are the ones that their whole world is the group that they have
Sure.
they've surrounded, and we kind of create this world ourselves. Because think about it, when you're growing up, like in past, people were very much more intergenerational. They tended to hang around with people that were older, younger, you know, all over the map.
Sure.
Families, lived with other family members that were, of multiple generations, and we're not doing that as much. So, but how do we live our lives? Well, we live our lives by going to school instead of in a one-room schoolhouse where there was a breadth of ages.
Right.
Um, we now go to people with folks that are our same age. And work career is a little bit more broad for a lot of people, but not necessarily as broad as what someone might think. But from school age on, we're mostly with people that are our peers, so we tend to aggregate and congregate around those that are roughly our same age.
Sure.
And yet, I found that if someone is around people that are 10, 15, 20 years younger than them, as well as their peers, they do better. And
Absolutely.
part of it is that um, that first of all, people aren't dying off, and so that's a part of why um, we do better. But also, I think it's because it keeps us a little bit younger, because our mindset isn't just stuck with those that are our age. We
Exactly.
also are interacting with folks that are younger than us. So it does by nature keep our mind younger. And Also, people who do well tend to be lifelong learners, that they, are constantly trying to grow. They've done studies that people who do well into old age oftentimes work longer. And so, when they look at, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but when they look at blue zones, one of the things that is one of the learnings or things that they captured is people in the blue zones tend to work all their life. Now, it may change how much they work and what they are doing their work on, but they continue to work, which keeps their mind engaged. I think is really the part of it, is
Exactly.
that they don't just settle, that they, are constantly, thinking, developing, growing, having to learn new skills in
Sure.
order to do what they need to do. And So I think that the Global Leadership Conference, helped me to start thinking about the fact that, yeah, you have to learn, you have to grow, you have to develop in order to be successful in business. A business that stays stagnant um, tends to eventually shrink. It's only as you learn new skill sets and you develop and you are incrementally getting better at whatever you're doing that you're successful as a company. And the same thing with a person. As we age, we have to do that. We
Absolutely.
um and um and I think that so constantly growing and constantly learning is really vitally important for people in the aging process. The other thing I think that is important to do is activity. Like I can go into a situation, and I may have said this before, but I can go into a situation and I can look at someone and I can pretty much predict what's going to happen to them. And I have this ability now because I've seen so many people and what their life process is. Like I can see someone younger and I can say, "Ooh, I know the path that you're going to take physically." Um, and but one of the things that is important is that a person who does well in old age has to keep on moving. And there's a thing that I've told many families, and that is when someone stops moving, they start dying. And physically, it is absolutely vital that people continue to to physically remain active. You may not be running marathons.
Sure.
Maybe someone when they were younger was running marathons or 10Ks or 5Ks or whatever. But that doesn't mean you can't continue moving, that you can't garden, that you can't do something physically. You can't continue to walk. You need to be able to walk. You need to be able to do the things that you're able to do. And what I would say is the difference is you need to go a little bit lower impact um, in order to have a better impact on your
Sure.
health and
It's
on your life. Well, what does that affect? Well, it affects your mind, it affects your body, it affects your ability to get around, it affects, our weight, circulation. All of those things are impacted by that. And so that's also a really, really critical thing if for doing it. It's just changes and morphs a little bit as we age. But I will tell you, someone who stops physically being active will start it to be in a much faster decline than you would otherwise be. And when someone does stop moving, that is a bad place.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. I'm
yeah,
glad you brought that up because my father was extremely active despite the fact that he had health issues. Um, and towards the end, he was using oxygen at night. And one night he got up and tripped over the oxygen cord and
yeah,
he broke his femur. But because of his age and other things, they decided they weren't going to repair the femur.
mm,
So he basically, you know, they let it heal on its own, but he spent all that time in bed while it was healing. And then once it was healed, it was so weak that they didn't even recommend physical therapy. And now thinking back, it's like I don't understand why, but they didn't. And that's when he started to decline. He needed more oxygen, he needed more things. And I remember saying to my mother, oh, maybe 3, 4 years after he passed away, why didn't, we do therapy? Why, because she could barely get him up. and help him into
Right.
the wheelchair to go to the bathroom and things like that. And she looked at me and she said, I don't know. But you know what? He probably would have had another 5, 10 years. And he
Yeah.
really would have because that's how active he was. So, it plays a huge role.
Yeah. Um, I think when someone breaks a hip, on average, and the studies, I I wasn't expecting me speaking about this directly, but it's something around 25% will die within a year. And the issue is not the broken hip. The issue is the inactivity or limits of activity that comes along with that. Part of it may be the broken hip because you can have secondary
Sure.
complications and stuff like that. But a lot of it is activity related, that you start to atrophy because you can't move. And it's actually, that's a statistic that is comprehensive of both men and women. But if you break it down to the effect that it has on men specifically, um, the rate is much, much higher for men than women, as far as death rate. So that's why, being careful about osteoporosis, and trying to be physically active beforehand, so that if you do fall, you have better balance or
Sure.
other things, so you're not having a situation where you're at the worst end of that statistic.
Sure.
Um, as important, or hopefully don't break, you're avoiding breaking a hip, from the beginning.
Right.
But yeah, but it's the inactivity that is really the issue with that. What do you think about the thought that I had before, as far as and I'm just thinking about
Sure.
your experiences as far as intergenerational, um, or that whole thing about keeping your mind active.
Well, first of all, keeping your mind active is very, very important because we can go stale very quickly.
Yeah.
I find that, and this has happened to me my whole life, if I don't have something to do, which typically I always find something to do, but if I don't have something to do, somebody can start having a conversation with me hours later, and I just feel like I'm in a fog. So staying active for me is extremely important, whether it's being in the company of other people, going out on my own, being on the computer and working. But intergenerationally, I think it's very interesting because my mother-in-law always had her group of friends who she went to school with, and they had their kids together. But then she had this other group of friends who were sometimes even younger than my husband and myself. And I always wondered, like, what do they see in her and what does she see in them? And it was the activity, it was the conversation, it was, learning something that maybe her friends didn't care about. And I have found I've done the same thing. Um,
Mm.
in fact, I had lunch with a friend of mine, probably about a month or so ago. We're sitting and we're talking, and she's in her mid 30s. I mean, she could be my daughter. And I even said that to her, and she goes, no, 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 you're not that old. And I said, it doesn't make any difference what my age is, but in theory, yes, I am that much older than you. And I found out I'm actually older than her mother. Um, but she said, you're more vibrant. And I said, it's because when they put me 6 feet under, I want to have had experiences up until that moment.
Yeah.
And when I think about my grandparents, that once they retired meant they sat on their front porch, they sat in their kitchen. Um, they didn't do a lot of anything other than maybe go visit their children. And I think that aged them terribly because I remember as a little kid thinking that my mother's mother was extremely old and she was 50 when I was born. But to me,
Mm,
she looked the same when I was little as she did when she passed away.
wow. Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that I think is important is nutrition. And we've all heard it, throughout life, but and there's lots of fads and a lot of things, but I will say um, that there is a huge problem with obesity, and and obesity has its consequences. There is really an issue when you carry weight. It, People, when you're older, you need to carry a little extra weight. You shouldn't be too thin. That's not a good thing. Um, but a lifetime of being overweight or being, you know, heavy, it really does have consequences,
Sure.
and it leads to things like heart disease and the dementia. They call dementia type 3 diabetes. There's such a tie with or a link with diabetes and dementia. So getting blood sugars in control is really important. It's simple, you know, eating complex carbohydrates is fine. If you live in a diet of like simple
Yeah,
carbohydrates, it is not good, and that's not a good thing. Eating whole foods really is important. If you can substitute whole foods um, with even with the complex carbs and stuff like that, the new term right now is eating clean,
yeah,
and there's a lot of truth in, I think, eating clean, and I think all the more important as you get older to get your weight to the right weight, which doesn't mean thin, but it does mean healthy weight. You do not
mm,
want to be overweight. It will lead to really bad things. And I've seen that over and over and over again. And, if you eat the right oils, if you should limit, I think, the amount of oils that people have. And there's a lot of controversy. So this is my opinion,
sure.
as far as, but, you know, what you shouldn't be eating is a lot of like the bad seed oils. If you're going to
Right.
have oil, um, eat the right oil. Don't eat something high in saturated fat. It's not. It doesn't lead to good things. Again, my opinion. Don't eat seed oils because it's high in omega sixes. Eat things that are higher in omega threes, or eat things like like I said, like the olive oils
Sure.
that are closer to the Mediterranean diet. We know that is, if you're gonna, for oil, that's a good thing. As Dr. Esselstyn, who is from the Cleveland Clinic, has had spectacular results and what he was promoting or has promoted is more of a vegetarian diet, that is low in fat, and it's higher in carbohydrates, but it is, the result as far as reversing heart disease is proven. It's not, there's no doubt about that it does reverse heart disease in people who follow his particular diet. So I'm not advocating his particular diet. I'm saying the diet has an impact and the results are out there and you can see it and you can make your decision on which diet to follow. But I will say, which kind of path to follow as far as a diet protocol. But I will say that there are certain things that seem to be rising to the surface
Sure.
that does make a difference,
Well,
you
I will
know.
tell you that one of the things that I've learned, my doctor didn't talk to me about it, but I talked to my doctor about it. And I said, my diet has changed based on listening to my body when I eat something.
Hmm.
And he looked at me and he goes, well, you're allowed to cheat once in a while. I said, but if you listen to your body, you don't need to cheat because you know what that food is going to do to you. And I started understanding this after my son had his emergency gallbladder surgery because nobody told him how to change his diet. I went out and did some research and said, you need to stay away from these things. Whatever, if you're eating red meat, it's got to be very small amounts. And you need to eat vegetables and fruit. And he's not a fruit eater. So we found a way around the fruit. Okay. He doesn't mind a smoothie. So it's like, okay, you can make a smoothie. And the two of us have realized that very few foods upset us anymore because we think about things before we either eat them or make them. And that goes as far as how much we put on our plate. And I don't know
Oh
how
yeah.
you,
Oh yeah.
yeah. And I don't know how you grew up, but I grew up with a mother who, would put big dishes on the table and we would just keep spoon feeding ourselves. And I never understood what a serving was.
Yeah. Well,
Surprisingly, I'm not, 1,000 pounds at this point, but now when I cook, I know for my husband and I that what our portions need to be. And we're not hungry. And sometimes I use a smaller plate so that it looks like it's more food. But
oh yeah, that's smart.
most of the
Yeah.
time it's like, and we're fine with it. So it takes learning and like you said before, educating yourself.
Yeah, well, and if you eat slow, you tend to do better. I think if you eat salads at the beginning of your meal, like my mom was always every meal, every dinner, excuse me, she always had a salad, and she was obsessive about it. But I think there was something actually really good about that. Now, I grew up differently. I grew up in a big family, and we had relatively small portions because
Oh,
when it got divided up, and you couldn't take too much,
right.
when it got divided up, um, you basically had what would be considered a healthy portion, and there was not a lot left over at the end. So, like I would get for dinner, we would have one piece of chicken, not like multiple pieces of chicken. There might be one piece left. So if someone was really hungry, they could eat that, but that would probably go with someone who was the oldest. Not it ended up getting that. Or someone who had worked hard that day, you
Right.
know, outside or something. So, but I do think that the the your idea of portion size is actually really true. And if you eat, the that portion, and then you kind of see, am I still really truly hungry afterwards? Well, one thing I did this last year is I cut out pretty much all simple sugars. So I'll have a little bit of maple syrup now in my diet, like where I'll have like if I have oatmeal or something, I'll put a little bit of maple syrup on it. But usually I'm putting fruits and nuts and stuff. So, it may be like a teaspoon and a half of for a big bowl of
Sure.
cereal is all that I need because there's already raisins or fruits or cranberries or something in there. So, but one thing I've noticed is that sugar makes you crave sugar.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
if you eat something that is simple carbs, you get those cravings. If you don't eat that, I don't get cravings for sugar anymore. And I mean, I just don't. And I think that um, I think it's because whatever that is in the sugar that makes you crave
Yeah.
it, if you just cut it out, you don't actually crave it anymore. And it's very, very, very rare that I ever get a sugar craving at all since I did that. And what I find is if I get a craving for something sweet, if I eat an apple or if I eat a piece of fruit, it goes away. It just that's I don't need that, and and I'm not getting those sugar spikes that you get with that, or insulin spikes that cause you to um, crave sugar.
But it's
So
that social media and the commercials on TV that trigger so many of us that say, you know, I went off sugar 100% about 5 years ago, and I lost a lot of weight, and I
mm,
kept it off. And then I don't know what happened, but I went somewhere and somebody said, "Oh, just a small piece of cake." And I said, "I'll have a taste." And that one taste, the next day, I wanted something else. And instead of in my brain saying, "Okay, go back to your apple, go back to the watermelon," instead, I went for the cookie. And then it started piling up again. In the last couple months, I've said to my husband, I just can't eat the sweets. They
yeah,
start making me ill. And he's diabetic, but certain sugars don't bother his blood level. And so if he has a craving for ice cream at night, he'll eat a dish of ice cream, and
mm,
in the past I couldn't resist it because he was eating it. And now there's just something about it that I don't want it. And the other night I too had an apple and he looked at me and he goes, "You're eating an apple and I'm eating ice cream." And I said, "Yeah, who's the healthier one now?"
so yeah, I do think in the end that the as I mentioned before, what I've noticed is that people who eat well tend to do better into old age, and or those who are even in old age uh, what you might call the golden years.
Sure.
If you make those changes, it will make a difference. So it's not too late to change certain things
Absolutely.
for someone. But I will tell you that it will avoid a lot of problems for a lot of people. Not all problems for all people, but a lot of problems for a lot of people by incorporating some of these ideas that I had mentioned. I'm going to finish with just kind of, a thought that I had from um, world, the global leadership conferences. I heard one of the folks that had spoken. His name is Will Guidera, and yeah, I don't know if you've heard of him before, but he um, talked a lot about hospitality. He had the um, he was a part of developing the restaurant that became um, the number one restaurant in the world. It was ranked the number one
Okay.
restaurant in the world. And um, and it's called 11 Madison Park in New York City. And anyway, the interesting thing that I found with what his speech was, he was talking about the importance of oh, you know how they developed a restaurant that really practiced hospitality in a real extreme way. And that's how they had really became the number one in the world. There were a lot of folks that were technically creating a great food experience. They had great food. What he wanted to do was extend this idea of hospitality. So food is married with the idea of, of a place where people experience uh, or have an experience, or where there's this welcome feeling that they get, and where they kind of merged, not so that it's not just a kind of an experience of eating food, but an experience of being welcome,
Sure. Sure.
and having that kind of that that kind of inclusive idea when you go to a restaurant. And I'm not articulating it well, but I loved his concept. And one of the things as a company is we're going to be incorporating much more of the ideas that he espoused in what we're doing and how we're doing it. Not in the same way, we're not a restaurant, but in how we're having people experience care, and merging really good care with how people feel. And that's what we've done all along. But my goal is in the next few years that we're going to take that to, the next level, and in a way that is not only, puts us as a company as one of the best companies in the world, in the country,
Right.
but I want to be, truly the leaders of what that is, nationally, and potentially internationally. And lofty goals for a company that is not global, but I want to be the very best that we can be, and make it so that people's experiences of care is, and you've heard me articulate this,
Sure.
is absolutely flawless in our execution, as much as we can make that, so that people get the type of care that for their parents, for themselves, for others, that merges not only technical, but also that warmth of experience as well. And look for greater things to come
I'm looking
from
forward
us,
to it.
So yeah.
And
So that's
I'm glad you're going to do that. And I know that you've been doing that all along, but you're going to take it to the next level. There are so many of us as we're reaching our 70s and 80s. We're so afraid of that next step. You
oh
know,
yeah.
we don't want to go into a facility. We want to be able to stay at home, but we don't want to feel like somebody is nursing us or babysitting us. And I just had a conversation with my brother yesterday out in California. He celebrated his 82nd birthday, and both he and his wife have health issues.
Hmm.
My brother is a little more active than his wife is. Um, but he said to me, he says, I'm 82. I only have so much that I can do. He said, I can't imagine if I can't do something and somebody has to take care of me.
Right.
What kind of patient I'm going to be. And I said, but you don't necessarily have to be a patient. Okay. And I wanted him to think about it, that you might need some assistance, but doesn't mean that you're not capable. And he goes, oh, I thought when I would call for assistance, that would mean I'm not capable. And I said, no, maybe if you get assistance earlier, you'll be more capable longer. And as I said to him, I'm thinking about myself, but it's like, I don't want to think about those things, but they're
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah, you've heard me preach this,
Yes.
along, that it's really true that You know, taking control doesn't mean you're losing your independence by getting someone in. It means you're remaining in control and you're making the decisions
Right.
that will end up making it so that you have a better quality of life. You're still having that control. What you don't want to do is do things in such a way that you end up losing control.
Exactly.
And so yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
Yep. Well,
So it was great talking to you.
thank you. And we will see you again next month. Take
All
care.
right, take care. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.